Soon Grimaldus and his charge made their way to Armageddon Prime, where Hive Volcanus was still besieged by the enemy and the winds were more often free of the burning sand and ash that so blighted the other side of the world. The Celestial Lion's firebase was located atop a natural rise in the landscape, supremely defensible, with great battlements and sacred statuary of fallen imperial heroes staring down at any who would dare bring the fight to those dark walls. The whole site was already in ruin. The pair of Black Templars were honored for their presence by the remaining lions. Grimaldus noticed right away that several of the Celestial Lions were plundering their own firebase's supplies, loading up their surviving Thunderhawks with brutal efficiency. The warriors themselves kept at least one hand free to reach for a bolter at a moment's notice. A lone Space Marine came forward, bearing the black helm of a Pride leader. He knelt before the Reclusiarch and removed his dark helmet. Grimaldus was greeted by the sight of a face that was a warm, rich brown complexion of a human born to equatorial climes. Though he had never been to the Lion's homeworld of Elysium IX, he had met many of its dark-skinned sons. They were a culture of hunters, proud from birth to death, true signs of dawn. Grimaldus did not recognize the warrior who introduced himself as Pride Leader Akene Dubaku. Pride Leader was the Lion's term for a squad sergeant. This did not bode well. Dubaku was now the senior surviving Lion who led those that remained. The veteran Marine explained that there were 96 Lions still drawing breath upon Armageddon, and that he had inherited command from war leader Vakembe, he of the spear that hunts hearts who had been slain 18 solar days earlier. Grimaldus knew Vakembe, a stalwart Space Marine officer and deadly swordsman. The Reclusiarch inquired as to the whereabouts of Deathspeaker Julkara. The Pride leader replied that he had been slain by the Kine, a Celestial Lion's term for cattle or beasts, the Greenskins, nearly 24 solar days past. Now the surviving Lions were looting what was left of their supplies at their forward base. They had little choice, since it was overrun. Their fallback stronghold was within Hive Volcanus itself, but they risked raids in this forward area every 3 solar days. Ammunition was low, production and resupply from their fleet had dropped to almost nothing. Grimaldus wondered why the Celestial Lions had not requested aid from the other chapters present on Armageddon, but understood that Dawn's blood ran thick in the veins of his descendants. It was difficult to lay such pride aside, even in the face of devastation. Especially then, for that was when a warrior was truly tested. There was no other time more fit for proving that a man was strong enough to stand alone. Dubaku explained that they had swallowed their pride long enough to request aid from the Flesh Tearers and the Black Templars, but the former were as depleted as they were, and the latter were preparing to take the fight out to the stars in pursuit of the fleeing Orc warlord. The Lions felt they had no right to beg for scraps while being left behind. So they existed by plundering their fallen fortress and looting their own dead. This confirmed for Grimaldus that Julkara's summons had been a personal one. It had cost his pride dearly to send it. The Reclusiarch was struck by one thing above all else: the Celestial Lions were effectively dead. While 100 yet remained, the chapter operated now without a single voice from their chapter's high command, and their ranking veteran officer was a squad sergeant. Grimaldus ordered the Lions to finish loading their gunships, then he wanted Dubaku to tell him everything that had happened to the chapter since they made planetfall. It remained to be seen just what Julkara expected of the Black Templar, or what Grimaldus could actually achieve for the Lions. It already felt less like he had been summoned to save the Lions, and more like he had been called to hold vigil, watching over the chapter as it died. The Pride leader's tale was grim. The Reclusiarch's blood ran cold as Dubaku revealed each new betrayal that had occurred. Grimaldus quickly realized that the surviving Lions meant to die on this world. The Pride leader confirmed this was true. The Lions intended to die alongside their brothers, as it should be. Deathspeaker Julkara wished for Grimaldus to know the truth behind their coming last stand, and ensure that those who shared their Primarch's blood never spoke ill of their sacrifice. Cynric argued that the Celestial Lions should return to Elysium IX, to endure the shame if they must, as the Crimson Fists endured their shame after the Battle of Rin's world. They had to rebuild their chapter. The galaxy must not lose the Celestial Lions forever. But the remaining Lions scoffed at this suggestion. Their chapter had been savaged beyond resurrection. Men, material, knowledge, all of it was gone. They had nothing to hand down to any generation that would follow them. The remaining Lions refused to flee like cowards. But it was not cowardice Cynric advocated, it was survival to preserve precious blood, and to rise again to fight another day. Grimaldus agreed with both opposing viewpoints, for a glorious last stand was no more less respectable than preserving the infinite value of a Space Marine chapter. But Grimaldus wondered if Cynric would advocate shame if he were the one facing the prospect of so glorious a last stand. Easier to speak of shame than endure it. And yet Grimaldus was just as determined that the chapter had to survive. The remaining lions explained to Grimaldus that the Inquisition wanted to silence them. But the Reclusiarch assured them that this was not the case. They were using the Celestial Lions to make an example. The lions were in fact the most recent casualty in the Inquisition's campaign to rein in the political autonomy of the Adeptus Astartes. The Inquisition tolerated no attacks on its sovereign rights, yet the lions had challenged them. And now all would bear witness to the price of their chapter's rebellion. The sabotages, the conflicting orders, the ambushes, all would lead to the destruction of a Space Marine chapter. Millions of Imperial citizens would hear of how the Celestial Lions were killed on Armageddon. A mere handful would know the truth behind their deaths, and each of those would be Adeptus Astartes officers who would tread with much more caution when they dealt with the Inquisition in the future. The lesson would be learned, just as Inquisitor Apollyon's cronies wished. Digesting this information, Pride leader Dubarku explained to the Reclusiarch that his chapter would make for the Mannheim Gap and that, though many of the Gargants were gone, it was still a well-defended Orc stronghold. It remained a cancer in Hive Volcanus' territory, and it must fall. This seemed idealistic at best to Grimaldus. He informed the lions that in fact, it would not fall. Not to a handful of lions, no matter how noble and proud they were. Dubarku countered that they would die trying, for this was where the Celestial Lions had chosen to die. It had to be there, for then their bones would lie alongside their brothers. Grimaldus inquired if the lions would fight alone, to which Dubarku replied that they would. Volcanus could not spare its Astra Militarum regiments. Even with Mannheim emptied of Gargants in the solar weeks since the massacre, a fact they still could not be certain was true, it was still a difficult target, rich with the enemy's presence. 5 of the Lions' battle companies had failed to take it. A few thousand guardsmen would be nothing more than spitting into the wind. The Lions could not trust any of the guardsmen in any case, for the Inquisition's talons were everywhere. After hearing their tale of woe, Grimaldus decided that Cynric had been right. The Lions' death would be a disservice to the Imperium, no matter the greatness of their glorious last stand, no matter the heroism of individual warriors as they spent their life's blood. The Lions argued that this was how they wanted it to end, to finish their legacy in fire, not in centuries of painstaking laboratory work to preserve their bloodline. They wanted to die as warriors. Indeed they would, thought Grimaldus, 100 warriors, dying in glory, and denying the possibility of thousands of warriors who might be needed in a darker future. It was Dawn's way to fight on no matter the odds. Death against overwhelming numbers was no shame to any warrior born of the Imperial Fist's gene seed. Yet, those were lessons first taught 10,000 Terran years ago, when the Imperium was so much stronger. The last centuries of the current Dark Millennium had all but bled mankind's empire dry. Yet the Reclusiarch still admired Dubarku for his hunger to taste a glorious death, even if it was a last charge few would remember. Dubarku informed the Reclusiarch that they would not delay the inevitable and were prepared to make their last stand almost immediately. His chapter would gather their resources the next day at their forward base, and make one last scouting run for supplies and survivors. The Lions would then charge to their final war at dawn the day after. The Pride leader made one last request of the stern chaplain. He requested that Grimaldus grant final unction to the surviving Celestial Lions warriors. The Black Templar had only agreed to speak of the Lions' death, and that he understood how it had happened and why they had chosen to act as they did. But now they wished for him to also bless their damnation. The Lions had no surviving Death Speakers, and so they wanted Grimaldus to bless the warriors of another chapter, sharing the Black Templars' sacred rituals, and vowing before the Emperor and Rogel Dawn that their death would be a noble testament to the Imperial Fist's bloodline. Grimaldus looked upon the surviving Celestial Lions, standing amongst them during their desperate, respectful silence. Grimaldus felt he had no choice, could not grant his blessing to the suicide of the chapter, and refused to perform the requested rite upon the Lions. Grimaldus and his charge then departed the Celestial Lions' forward base and made for the Eternal Crusader. He went there to put an audacious plan into motion. The chaplain knew he could not return to Hive Hellsreach, for the Season of Fire played its tempestuous games around the city, harsh enough to kill sky traffic but not quite violent enough to interfere with Vox signals. Utilizing the flagship's powerful communication array, he was able to amplify his transmitter's signal to send a message through. Making contact with the Imperial forces on the ground, he relayed a series of orders to one of the Astra Militarum officers present there. It took several more solar hours of coordinating Hellsrake's defenses from high orbit. Grimaldus knew a great many guard officers were going to Vox skyward for confirmation in the hours to come. Time passed, as Grimaldus spoke with 81 Astra Militarum officers and 11 naval captains. As his clearance was Rubicon grade, no one dared to question his orders. Cynric questioned the senior chaplain's motives, and wondered if he hadn't exceeded his authority. But Grimaldus argued that the Lion's survival would be for the best, and he was depleting Hive Hellsrake's defenses to march alongside the Lions back into the Mannheim Gap. The Reclusiarch explained that the city was vastly over-defended now, with entire battalions sitting idle and awaiting redeployment. It was an irritating truth. Would that they had such a problem when the real war was being fought. The soldiers in Hellsreach were actually bored. They did not do well with tedium, especially when left alone with nothing to do and no one to shoot. Cynric felt that Grimaldus was playing on the people's regard for him. The hero of Hellsreach called them to war. Of course they would follow, but he was sure it was their war. The Reclusiarch argued that it was their world, and it was the only chance the Celestial Lions had, if they were to survive. The Lions' unseen enemies might well allow him to die in the glory they deserved. But their deaths served nothing but to ease the soreness of wounded pride. The Celestial Lions must not die on Armageddon, and without help, the chapter was doomed. Everything depended on just how fast Grimaldus's forces at Hellsreach could break out from the storm, and redeploy halfway across the world. Arranging for an Imperial Navy shuttle, both Grimaldus and Cynric deployed to the surface of Armageddon. Dawn was less than a solar hour away as they broke cloud cover above the Lions' ruined fortress stronghold. Grimaldus wondered if the Lions would have already left their fallen fortress by the time they arrived, marching towards their last stand. Besides the remaining 4 dust-blasted and paint-stripped Thunderhawks possessed by the Lions resting upon the wide rooftop platform, dozens of inelegant, blocky troop landers had joined him there. Struggling to locate an unmarked, untaken patch of ground, Grimaldus ordered the shuttle to break off its descent, as both he and Cynric jumped from the ship's rear bay. The pair of Black Templars descended from the sky to the ground by utilising their jump packs. Pride leader Dubaku was taken aback by the return of the Black Templars. Grimaldus replied that he thought that the Lions might appreciate the extra bodies. The Reclusiarch was greeted by General Chironov of the Armageddon Steel Legion, the acting commander of the Imperial military forces at Hellsreach. Within the solar hour a war council was called, ordained before a battalion of revving tanks. The plan was simple: they would march into the Mannheim Gap, and they would destroy anything that moved or breathed. Dubaku stood with Grimaldus at the heart of the impromptu conclave, his anger a palpable thing. He directed his ire at the Reclusiarch, who he felt had overstepped his authority. The Pride leader didn't appreciate these interlopers who threatened to interfere with their personal vendetta and their glorious last stand. He argued with Grimaldus that this was the Celestial Lions' fight and no one else's. Dubaku warned Grimaldus that when the time came, when they confronted the Orc warlord responsible for so many of his battle brothers' deaths, it would be a lion's blade that killed the creature. Grimaldus vowed grimly that it would be so. And so, the forces gathered from Hellsreach marched in long, armored columns towards the Mannheim Gap. Every hope they possessed that Mannheim would be near devoid of Orc titans was crushed before the first Steel Legion soldier had set foot on the loose rock slopes leading down into the canyon. The enemy was present in grotesque force. Great sockets in the rigging and stanchions along the canyon walls marked the absence of several gargants, but many more were undergoing repair or reawakening after fighting in recent battles. The ravine was choked by multitudes of orcs going about their work, and thousands of mouldering corpses piled up into a sea of decaying organic matter. Gold armor, darkened and soiled by waste, showed among the barricades of the looted dead. The dead Celestial Lions had been heaped in undignified repose with their Xenos murderers, and their ceramite, useless to the junkyard heresy that constituted greenskin technology, was left to encase the rotting warriors amidst their flesh cairns. The Imperial force advanced over the sea of the disrespected dead, for tearing the barricades down was not an option. The guardsmen climbed and waded through the sea of bodies or rode on the hulls of their tanks. Above the advance rode the gunship fleet, all flanking the 4 remaining Thunderhawks in the Celestial Lions' arsenal. The moment they streaked through the ravine's trench, cannon fire began to bring him down in tumbling fireballs. The Steel Legion did not balk at the sight of such a vast enemy horde. They plowed into the enemy's disarrayed ranks, slaughtering them to make room on fields of their bodies for the gunships to land. The first hours of the battle were unremarkable only for their ferocity. The Imperial Guard's massed cannonades devastated the greenskin war machines. In reply, the Orcs butchered the Guard at every point along the advance where it fell to men and women with bayonets to hold the line. As was so often the way of the Astra Militarum, they had the stronger steel, but the enemy had the stronger flesh. In such a grinding lock of armies, winning and losing was relative. The Imperial force pushed deep into the canyon as hundreds of men and women fell face down into the dirt. Behind the Space Marines lay a graveyard of tanks, practically all their own, all lost to enemy cannon fire. Lining the canyon's walls were the burning metal corpses of towering god constructs, hulled by missiles and tank shells, melting to slag in the flames of the Imperial Guard's bombardment. Stubber fire rattled against their ceramite harmlessly, but scythed guardsmen down in droves. Still the Imperials advanced, sloshing through a rising torrent of blood. It was knee-deep on most of the humans, turning all advancement into a sweating wade through filth. Soon the pivotal moment of the battle came upon Grimaldus, as it had so many times before, his heraldry often drawing enemy commanders to him as often as he fought his way to them. It happened again at Mannheim, though he tried to avoid it. The largest of the Orcs, doubtless hunting the Reclusiarch by heraldry, launched itself at Grimaldus from behind. It was a thing of blunt fangs, sinewy muscle and hammering limbs, larger than Grimaldus, and both stronger and faster than him. A celestial lion called out to the Reclusiarch, reminding him that the Orc warlord was the Pride leader's kill. Grimaldus faced off against the massive beast, swinging his Crozius maul at the foul creature, but the powerful greenskin moved as if immune to everything thrown against it. Las fire lanced off the creature, going ignored against its armor, and equally ignored as the volleys scored fingertip-sized holes in its flesh. Celestial lions charged the creature, but the hulking warlord countered their feeble assaults with a sweep of his mighty mangling claw. As Grimaldus was driven to his knees and eventually struck to the ground, Dubaku finally came between the two combatants with a leap and a roar. He held his hand back, bidding Grimaldus to remain away. The Reclusiarch had to force himself to obey, something he would never have countenanced in any other circumstance. But they had fought this battle for a bloodline's pride, and here was the moment of reckoning. Dubaku beat his blade against his chest plate, staring at the greenskin lord in its powered suit of tank armor scrap. Despite the cacophony of battle that raged all around them, Grimaldus could hear the celestial lion's words as clearly as if they had left his own mouth. In whatever underworld your foul breed believes, you shall tell your pig-blooded ancestors that you died to the blade of Akene of Elysium, Lion of the Emperor. No one knew it then, but at that moment, the Pride leader was the last lion still standing. Dubaku attacked, his chainsword worthless against the beast's claw. He had just as little hope of parrying the creature's cudgel with his combat knife. So what he lacked in strength, he poured into speed, never blocking, always dodging. The battle did not pause around the two combatants. Soon both the Pride leader and the Orc warlord were bleeding from a score of wounds. The chainsword had found its way through armor joints and plunged into soft tissue. The power claw had mangled the celestial lion's armor each time it fell. Soon, Dubaku was backing away. Fighting such a beast was no task for one warrior alone, no matter the pleasure of pride. Then came a thunderclap of noise as a massive electrical burst turned the air to charged static. Orcs and men in their droves cried out in pain at the sonic boom. The orbital shield was no longer functioning. Somehow at some point in the hours of melee, while the Reclusiarch fought with the lions, the Steel Legion had laid explosives at the base of the Void Shield reactor. The Emperor alone knew when, where, and how. No sooner had the shield imploded, spitting its static charge in all directions, than a powerful and priority channel Vox rune chimed loudly in the Reclusiarch's retinal display. Grimaldus activated it as he watched the Pride leader and the Orc lord stagger around each other, wounded animals too proud to die. Soon Grimaldus heard a familiar voice. It was High Marshal Helbrecht. He informed the chaplain that the Black Templars were ready to reinforce their position. All he had to do was give the word. Grimaldus informed the High Marshal to blacken the sky. At that moment the severely wounded Celestial Lion was down before Grimaldus could reach him. The beast clutched Dubaku's arm in its mangling claw, crushing it at the biceps before ripping it free. The Pride leader retaliated by ramming his chainsword in an awkward thrust into the creature's throat. Deflected by armor, it barely bit. His assault came at the cost of his leg, as the iron claw scissored through the limb at the knee, dropping him on his back into the slime. Grimaldus was on the beast's back a heartbeat later, securing himself by digging into the creature's armor with his boots as he wrapped his severed weapon chain around its bleeding, sweating throat. The chain garroted taut, cracking sinew in the beast's throat. The iron claw battered at the reclusiarch, shearing chunks of ceramite away. It staggered without toppling, gasped without truly suffocating. Even strangling it with his last remaining weapon, could not kill it. All Grimaldus could do was buy Dubarku the moments he needed to crawl free, which he quickly did. And Cynaric was waiting, a bolter in his remaining hand. The mutilated celestial lion reached up for it, clutching it one-handed in a pistol grip, and aimed it up as he lay back in the sludge. Grimaldus dropped back, not completely, but enough to pull the chain tighter, adding his weight to his strength, and wrenching the beast's head back to bare its throat. The bolter sang once, and the kick of something heavy struck near the chain. With a muffled burst, the orc's head came free, tumbling back over its shoulders and landing with the chaplain in the filth. The armored body stood there without anything existing above its neck, still too stubborn, too strong, to fall. Once he got to his feet, Grimaldus reclaimed his maul from the fallen beast. Then he tossed the thing's slack-jawed head to Dubarku where he lay. The battle continued to rage, as the men and women Grimaldus had led fought their way further down the canyon. Dubarku looked up at the darkening sky as the Black Templars descended in a massive drop-pod assault upon the Mannheim Gap. The lion's only reaction was to rise as best he could, and pull his helmet clear. He ordered the reclusiarch to help him stand. He didn't want to meet the High Marshal on his back. Cynaric and Grimaldus hauled Dubarku up between them. While they did so, the guards' Vox Link erupted in cheers, as Lord Helbrecht blackened the sky with Templar drop pods. Reclusiarch Grimaldus bid his farewell to the newly installed Chapter Master Akene Dubarku of the Celestial Lions, escorted by his surviving few warriors onto the Black Templars' strike cruiser Blade of the Seventh Sun, with its course plotted for the distant world of Elysium IX. Dubarku now bore a bionic leg and a noticeable limp, his physiology not entirely adjusted to the augmetic replacement yet. The armor he wore was gold warplate of an ancient Imperial Fists champion, granted as a gift from the Eternal Crusaders' Halls of Memory. His cloak was that of Helbrecht's own sword brethren, red on black, elegantly cast over one shoulder. It was not known if this was the very same cloak Helbrecht had granted to Dubarku when he forced him to take the oath of lordship over his depleted chapter. At his hip, bound by chains of black iron, was the flayed, polished skull of the greenskin warlord they had killed together. An honor indeed, to be named on a chapter master's prime trophy. The Black Templars' honor guard comprised to bid him good journey consisted of the reclusiarch, the newly promoted chaplain Cynaric, and the High Marshal's household knights, clad in ceremonial colors. The reclusiarch hoped most fervently, as time passed, that chapter master Dubarku's efforts in reconstructing the Celestial Lions and training the generation to follow him continued to go well. Grimaldus knew with grim satisfaction that they would most likely never meet again, as Dubarku was sworn to a life of defending what he could hold, and the Black Templars always sailed forth on the attack against the foes of the Emperor. Following the opening of the Great Rift, the Celestial Lions' homeworld of Elysium IX was invaded by the warband of chaos cultists and mutants known as the Exilarchy, which was led by the heretic Astartes and former Star Scorpions known as the Pure. The warband emerged from the warp following the Rift's creation. Before Elysium IX was invaded, the Celestial Lions chapter master Akene Dubarku prepared to evacuate its population. Dubarku knew it would be impossible to save the entire populace of the planet, but hoped that enough would survive to help both his chapter and the spirit and culture of Elysium IX to live on. The current fate of the world's surviving population is unknown, but Dubarku drafted a message asking his allied chapter master, Arrocators of the Emperor's Spears, if they could be relocated to his chapter's homeworld of Nemeton. In the midst of meeting with the Emperor's Spears representatives about this plan aboard their starship Hex, Dubarku was decapitated by a Calidus assassin who had been masquerading as a chapter serf named Kartash Avik in service to the Mentor's Space Marine Amadeus Caius Incarius. The assassin had been sent by the Inquisition to continue its vendetta against the Celestial Lions.